At 0923 hours on June 14, 2025, the USS Princeton was cruising through another routine freedom of navigation patrol in the South China Sea when its spy radar picked up something that nearly sparked World War III. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, which had been lingering 200 kilometers away, suddenly surged from 18 to 30 knots in under 90 seconds. Unbeknownst to the Americans, the Zhangjiang's captain had just received orders from Beijing, intercept the Americans and make them flinch first. But Beijing was about to discover why challenging the U.S. Navy in open waters is a spectacularly bad idea. The Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, seen here, was doing what American sailors have done best for 75 years, keeping the world's vital sea lanes open so Chinese factories could keep shipping their budget electronics to Best Buy. They were 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese territory, in international waters worth $3.4 trillion in annual trade flows like clockwork. The strike group's mission was textbook freedom of navigation, predictable course, transparent intentions, and the kind of professional conduct that separates elite navies from glorified coast guards. At 0926, the radar team completed target classification. They confirmed it was a Type 052D destroyer of the Chinese Navy, with a threat level rated moderate to high. Inside the Princeton's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched the Chinese destroyer's vector with the cool confidence of commanding 122 vertical launch cells packed with enough firepower to turn any Chinese ship into a coral reef. The spy radar, the world's most advanced naval sensor, painted a crystal-clear picture. You could practically count the rivets on the enemy ship. At its current speed, the destroyer would reach weapons engagement range in exactly 17 minutes. The math was simple but grim for the Chinese. Their YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could cover the distance in under 4 minutes once launched, but the Princeton's SM-6 missiles in surface mode could reach 240 nautical miles and swat them out of the sky like gnats. At 0929, the captain demanded to know the Chinese ship's likely intent. The answer was clear as day. At its current speed and heading, it would be within weapons range in 14 minutes. The recommendation was to sound general quarters. But the captain's response was peak American swagger. Let's see how badly they want to humiliate themselves first. And that's assuming they could even get there safely. The South China Sea was bustling with merchant traffic, 46 commercial vessels within 50 miles, all relying on the U.S. Navy to ensure safe passage. A Singapore-flagged container ship loaded with semiconductors, a South Korean LNG tanker worth $200 million, all would be at risk if Beijing turned international waters into its personal playground. But that would require beating the U.S. Navy in a fight, which, historically speaking, has never happened. At 0930, the Princeton's cooperative engagement capability shared the threat data across every ship in the strike group. The Nimitz herself, 104,600 tons of floating American diplomacy, carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft, adjusted her flight operations with the precision of a Swiss watch. The destroyers Chunghun and Kidd shifted positions to form a protective screen around the carrier, ensuring any Chinese attack would be a one-way ticket to Davy Jones' locker. At 0935, the situation escalated from concerning to dangerous. An E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting at 25,000 feet and providing a god's-eye view of everything within 400 miles, detected multiple aircraft launching from the Chinese carrier Shandong. The radar signatures matched J-15 fighters, climbing hard and heading south, as if they actually thought they had a shot. The air controllers couldn't help but chuckle. The J-15s were struggling to gain altitude, likely hampered by fuel limitations from the Shandong's ski-jump launch system, which the Chinese love to brag about. A minute later, sonar operators completed the picture of China's coordinated stunt. They picked up a possible submerged contact 80 nautical miles away, with an acoustic signature matching a Type 039 diesel-electric submarine. The funny part? It was making noise like a freight train. Any decent submarine crew would have been horrified. The Chinese weren't just being bold, they were orchestrating a multi-domain intimidation campaign with gear that belonged in a scrapyard. Surface ships from the 1990s, carrier aircraft that couldn't carry a full weapons load, and a submarine so loud it might as well have been broadcasting its position on AM radio. It was classic bullying, the kind that only works if your opponent is too weak or too scared to hit back. Unfortunately for Beijing, they'd picked a fight with the wrong navy in the wrong ocean. The U.S. Navy has been mastering blue water dominance since 1914, and these Chinese forces were about to get a free masterclass in why the American Navy rules the seas. By 0937, the Nimitz's flight deck erupted into the controlled chaos only American carriers can pull off. F divided by a -18E Super Hornets from VFA-14 top hatters blasted off the catapults at 45-second intervals, a ballet of precision that Chinese carriers, stuck with inefficient ski jumps, could only dream of matching. Steam poured from the catapult tracks as American naval aviation did what it does best, project overwhelming power. The 1st Division of Super Hornets climbed through 15,000 feet, their APG-79 AESA radars already locking onto the incoming J-15s at maximum range. The technological mismatch was almost unfair. The APG-79's 1,500 transmit-receive modules could track dozens of targets simultaneously, while the J-15's mechanically scanned radar swept back and forth like a lighthouse, practically shouting its position to anyone listening. The J-15s were struggling for altitude, a stark reminder of the Shandong's ski jump limitations. They were climbing hard to gain an energy advantage but burning fuel at a punishing rate. Meanwhile, the American fighters, launched at full combat weight, had fuel to burn and carried AIM-120 AMRAAMs rated E for everyone. But the weapons and fuel loadout was just the advantage the Chinese could see. Every F-18 was linked via Link 16, sharing sensor data in real time. When one aircraft saw something, they all saw it. Chinese pilots, on the other hand, relied on voice commands and individual sensors, like fighting a network team while blindfolded. The tech gap wasn't measured in years but decades. Then the EA-18G Growlers joined the fray without firing a shot. These electronic warfare jets, armed with ALQ-249 jamming pods, could fry enemy electronics from 100 miles away. As they set up their jamming orbits, Chinese communications started to crumble. On Chinese radar screens, ghost contacts multiplied. American fighters appeared, vanished, multiplied, and merged. What looked like 4 F-18s became 12, then 20. Radar locks broke and reformed constantly. The J-15 pilots were fighting phantoms while the real threats maneuvered unseen. The Americans executed a tactical formation called the Wall, a defensive setup honed over decades. High group at 35,000 feet, medium at 25,000, low at 15,000, multiple overlapping engagement zones with mutual support, leaving no escape for the Chinese without entering someone's weapons envelope. The Americans had the Chinese in a triple vice. The Chinese formation, by contrast, stayed bunched up, a necessity when your data links can't support distributed operations. They had to maintain visual contact to coordinate, making them predictable and vulnerable. Their J-15s might look good on propaganda posters, but in real combat, they were flying relics against 21st century warfare. At 0943, an RC-135V rivet joint provided critical intel. This ungainly Boeing 707 derivative had been circling for 6 hours, its electronic intelligence gear cataloging every Chinese emission. Mandarin linguists aboard were having a field day. Darkstar confirms Chinese pilots requesting permission for aggressive maneuvers. Repeat, they're asking for clearance to buzz our ships. The Chinese were escalating but waiting for approval first. American pilots, trained to seize the initiative, found this hilarious. By the time Beijing greenlit anything, the tactical situation would have shifted 3 times over. Meanwhile, the Princeton's defense systems tracked every threat with mechanical precision. Her spy radar, capable of tracking baseball-sized objects at over 165 miles, made the Chinese destroyer look like a billboard. Fire control solutions updated continuously, and it seemed they might soon come in handy. At 0947, the Zhangjiang crossed a line that would have triggered instant retaliation from any other navy. Her Type 346A phased array radar stopped searching and locked onto the Nimitz with fire control quality tracking. In naval warfare, this is one step short of launching missiles, the electromagnetic equivalent of aiming a loaded gun. Inside the Princeton CIC, the response was immediate but disciplined. American training, honed through countless drills, held firm. The Chinese were betting on American restraint against their aggression. They were about to learn restraint didn't mean incapability. The Princeton kept her fire control radars in standby. Her 122 vertical launch cells held enough firepower to sink the Zhangjiang in seconds, SM-6 missiles with a 240 km reach and SM-2s in surface mode, all ready to turn the destroyer into the sea's newest artificial reef. Every firing solution was continuously updated. The Chinese ship was at risk from multiple systems, from multiple angles, with zero chance of survival if things escalated. The fire control lock lasted exactly 30 seconds, long enough for the Chinese to claim they could have attacked, but not long enough to trigger American self-defense protocols. It was choreographed aggression, but against the wrong opponent. The Princeton's crew logged everything, timestamps, signal characteristics, bearing data, intel that would be invaluable in a real shooting war. But even after the Chinese stopped their radar lock, the situation was far from over. In the air, a J-15 pilot decided to show off, breaking formation and diving toward an F-18 in a maneuver pilots call a thump, an aggressive close pass meant to intimidate. The American pilot, trained at Top Gun where such moves are child's play, simply rolled inverted and pulled into the Chinese fighter's 6 o'clock position. For 3 seconds, the American had a perfect firing solution. His helmet-mounted display showed the J-15's engines glowing hot in infrared. One squeeze of the trigger, and an AIM-9X Sidewinder would have gone straight up the J-15's tailpipe. He didn't fire. Professional discipline held. The moment passed, but the Chinese had one more card to play. The Chinese escalation peaked when their submarine made its move. The Type 039 diesel-electric boat had been creeping closer, using the layer depth to mask its approach. At 0951, it made a fatal mistake, raising its snorkel to recharge batteries. TAO, sonar, subsurface contact, bearing 159, range 15,000 yards. Contact is snorkeling. Classified as probable Type 039. She's making noise like a freight train. The submarine captain either didn't know or didn't care that the Princeton's SQQ-89 sonar suite had been tracking him for the past hour. The ship had his acoustic signature cataloged, his position pinned to within meters. If this went kinetic, he'd have about 12 seconds to regret his decisions before an ASROC turned his sub into fish food. The tactical picture was now a textbook case of how not to run naval operations. The Chinese had boxed themselves in, carrier to the northwest, destroyer to the west, submarine to the southwest. If shooting started, none would survive the first 5 minutes. And the Americans were about to show them exactly how it would go down. At 1,430 hours, the Nimitz unleashed everything that could fly. 48 aircraft roared off her deck in the largest single-carrier air power display in years. Super Hornets armed with live weapons, EA-18G Growlers with electronic warfare packages that could black out a city, E-2D Hawkeyes commanding the electronic high ground, the afternoon sky darkened with American airpower. The Growlers struck first. Their ALQ-249 pods, operating at full power, turned Chinese radar screens into abstract art. False contacts multiplied by the hundreds, real aircraft vanished into electronic noise. The Shandong's air defense picture looked like someone had splattered paint across the screens. Chinese controllers couldn't tell real threats from ghosts, everything was a threat. Then came the submarine. A Virginia-class attack sub, which had been shadowing the Chinese formation for 8 days, silent, invisible, patient, surfaced 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, close enough for Chinese lookouts to see her black hull with their naked eyes. The psychological blow was crushing. 8 days of undetected operations, and their entire anti-submarine screen, choppers, sonobuoys, hull-mounted sonar, had failed to detect the 7,900-ton American sub. If this had been war, their carrier would already be at the bottom. The sub's commanding officer ordered an emergency surface purely for show. The submarine burst from the water like a breaching whale, water cascading off her hull in the afternoon sun. Chinese photographers would have gotten perfect shots of American dominance. After about 90 seconds, enough time to be seen, photographed, and reported, she slipped back beneath the waves. The message was unmistakable: we own the undersea domain. In the air, American fighters showcased air combat maneuvering at the expense of increasingly desperate Chinese pilots. The J-15s, already low on fuel from their ski-jump launches and hard climbs, couldn't match the Americans' turns. Each engagement ended the same way: American fighters in firing position, Chinese fighters defensive and burning precious fuel. One by one, the J-15s peeled off, limping back to the Shandong with near-empty tanks. Some landed with emergency fuel, probably seeing the bingo light they'd only encountered in simulators. By 1623, the Shandong's Carrier Strike Group began withdrawing. Official Chinese statements claimed they'd completed scheduled exercises, but everyone knew the truth. They'd come to flex Chinese naval power, to intimidate lawful navigation, to claim waters that weren't theirs. Instead, they got a masterclass in why the South China Sea is America's sixth Great Lake. Catch you later.